Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. My name's Alec McCutcheon. I'm a Director of Unicom. We're delighted to be hosting today's webinar. The theme today is the Feedback Onion Applying Behaviour Driven Development fast-track projects for delivering business capabilities in the shortest possible time frame. Quite a long title. And our presenter today, I'm very pleased to announce, is Jenny Martin. Jenny is the IT Solutions Director for Sparkle Coupon Services. She also provides training. In fact, we're working with Jenny next month, which is delivering 3 workshops related to this theme on the 17th, 18th and 19th of February. Jenny's got very deep experience and knowledge in this area. She's got over 15 years experience, a lot of knowledge behind with Agile. She's also ICF Test Management and Prince 2 certified. So what I'll do now, without further ado, I'll hand over to Jenny, and at the end there'll be time for question and answer. And we're also going to make a recording of the webinar available online, and we'll email you afterwards with a link to the recording. So, Jenny, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Alec. So I'll start with a little bit about me. I've had nearly 20 years in IT now. I started with Perot Systems as a test analyst, and I was with them for about 7 years and moved into mostly test management roles for different banks across Europe. And then I joined AMEA, who run the Nectar program back in about 2003, initially as test manager, where I put in place all of the testing and quality assurance processes. And then during the 8 years I was there, I moved into a broader role of systems delivery manager. So I was responsible for business analysis function as well as development. So we had an offshore team and an onshore team, and we started implementing some of these agile practices. I then left there 2 years ago and became IT Solutions Director for Sparkle. So Sparkle Coupon Services, our vision at Sparkle is to change the world of couponing, and particularly to help customers overcome technical challenges to do with coupon management. So we're dealing with retailers in the main. And it's been a privilege really to work for a small company and be able to put into practice some of the techniques that I'm quite passionate about, and also work with like-minded people who are also motivated by the same kind of thing. So we have a small development team and some of our own developers, but we also work really collaboratively with a company called Co-Made, who have helped us put into place some of these techniques that I'm talking to you about. The discovery of BDD, Behaviour Driven Development, has really been quite a revelation for me, in that the principles, which I hope you'll agree with as I go through this webinar, really make sense. They're real common sense principles amongst some of the noise out there around Agile, and they really work to help deliver successful business outcomes. Okay, so before I dive into BDD, let's first of all just take a look at Agile and some of the principles associated with Agile. Okay, so the Extreme Programming Explained. This is a book written by Kent Beck back in 1999, and he was essentially talking about the key important elements of extreme programming around small releases, collective ownership and testing, having an on-site customer. But I think more interestingly, he refers to these stable values of communication, simplicity, feedback and courage. My experience over the last kind of 6 or 7 years, I think, is that often we're forgetting some of these stable values in favour of some of the more kind of mechanical aspects of Agile. So then we had the manifesto, the Agile Manifesto back in 2001, and here the group of people that signed that manifesto talked about what they valued. So they're talking about valuing individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to change. And that's really important, that responding to change part. The whole world Agile is talking about responsiveness to change, being able to react to various changes in the business place. And so Agile is really, the benefits associated with it are in two main areas. One is in that the collaboration in itself is going to resolve defects before they happen and lead to a heightened understanding and actually remove defects down the life cycle. So that's got a cost saving associated with it. The second part is really about being able to deliver incrementally, and in order to do that, and the benefit of doing that, essentially you're getting your business ideas out there quickly, and you're actually getting a return on investment of those things. So that's kind of the business case behind Agile. And it's about investing in collaboration in order to achieve those benefits. And I say investing because staffing a team of a cross-functional team for an Agile project is very expensive compared to how we structure a team for a waterfall project, in that everybody's there from the beginning. So unless we're achieving those benefits, we might be wasting money. The principles from the Agile Manifesto, again, the highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early continuous delivery of valuable software, welcome changing requirements, business people and developers must work together, and obviously there's a number of others. But we'll notice that most of these principles are about collaboration, communication and value for the customer. So there's been a huge transition to Agile over the last 10 years. It's now becoming the norm. Many companies are in quite a lot of pain because they've made this investment in Agile, but they're not getting the benefits. So why is this happening? We have essentially some pitfalls, I think, associated with Agile delivery that we're falling into. One of the main ones, I think, is a tool focus. So tools are shiny and exciting, and especially in the world of IT, we quite like new tools and we quite like trying to implement them. And sometimes tools are looked upon to solve problems, whereas actually the problems reside in the processes themselves. And Scrum is a tool, and I've seen a value put on the Scrum mechanics sometimes over the actual principles themselves. So what I mean by that is focus on perhaps having a 10-minute stand-up meeting or using post-it notes or some of the other mechanics of Agile, like using tools like Jira, as opposed to really making sure that you're delivering business value early and that you're able to respond to change. Similarly, there's a lot of focus and a lot of investment made in automation. And automation is great, but if it's done selectively and if it's around high-value tests, so there's no point in automating something which doesn't have value. If we do automate stuff which doesn't have value, we're creating a huge overhead for ourselves in terms of maintenance, which we might not be getting massive benefit from. And this fourth one, value continuous delivery over concepts around time to market. Continuous delivery within a development team in a company involves overcoming of quite a lot of technical challenges and implementing of tools, etc. This can be really hard, in my experience, particularly for customers who have got a lot of legacy systems, high level of integration, quite a long, lengthy release process. This can be really very, very difficult and challenging. So actually the real problem is about how to identify an increment of value to deliver as opposed to continuous delivery necessarily into a production environment. I think another trap that we fall into sometimes with Agile is celebrating the wrong thing. So we focus a lot on velocity, on burn downs, on all sorts of Agile metrics that we get. Whereas our focus really should be on how much value we're delivering to the customer. And we're not so good at measuring that. I've worked on lots of projects where we don't actually go back and measure how well we did, or how well our ideas, our business capabilities are actually working in terms of what the desired impact was. We often move quickly towards a lack of documentation and sometimes throwing the baby out with the bathwater even, due to implementing agile processes. We're not sure what the appropriate level of documentation is anymore. We celebrate test coverage potentially, which I'm not saying any of these are wrong, they're all important, useful metrics, but we need to be making sure that we're getting the value out of them. And then there's certain things that come along with Agile, lots of rigid rules sometimes, such as, you must not introduce something into the sprint once the scope's been agreed. And although I recognise the importance of that, sometimes because of all those rules, we feel a bit less ready to use our own initiative and make decisions as we need to in accordance with things that are happening in the business. And there's all sorts of definitions of done, whereas the only really important one is about the business feedback in terms of whether or not what we're doing is useful. So we celebrate the wrong thing. And fundamentally, I think this is a really tough one to overcome. Agile principles can be very much driven by the development teams, and it's difficult to get that buy-in from the business. We can spend a lot of time collaborating within kind of three amigos, between a developer, business analysis, and tester. But if we're struggling to engage our business stakeholders, then the value of that activity is lessened. It's really difficult to get enough business involvement. And even when we do have business involvement, it can be limited, so we need to try and make the most out of that limited time. And I think fundamentally, we see, or stakeholders often see, IT as a cost rather than an investment. And that causes lots of problems in Agile because we're often working in a time box and trying to put across our ideas, our kind of fundamentals around variable scope. And making that transition is really difficult for businesses. So those are some Agile pitfalls. What is BDD really about? Well, it's about these stable values. It's about helping to bridge those gaps between the business and the technical teams. It's about keeping things lean and simple, focusing on feedback. And I think courage to an extent in that we're trying to focus on the most important examples and have courage to defer detail associated with some less important stuff. Okay, so we talked about some of the Agile pitfalls. How can BDD help with that? What's it all about? Well, there's lots of different views of BDD, and here's my take, really. So let's start with the origins of BDD. So test-driven development is kind of one of the principles that BDD is based on. And this was first referred to in XP and the Agile stuff. And it's where the developer first writes a failing unit test, automated test case, that defines some kind of desired improvement, and then produces a minimum amount of code to pass the test, refactors that code to acceptable standards, and go through that process again. And this is intended to encourage simple design, essentially. Another key part of BDD is about domain-driven design. This is coined by this guy, Eric Evans. And domain-driven design is really about modelling the design of the system with a deep relationship to the business domain, and using language which is universal between the business domain and the technical teams, and trying to take out any miscommunications around that. And he refers to ubiquitous language which helps achieve this collaboration. And the idea of that is that if you have a design that really closely represents the actual business domain, then a small business change, a change in a small business rule should lead to a small change in the code. rather than a small change in the business rule leading to some wide spaghetti kind of impact across a code. So that's the principles of that. And then behaviour-driven development has kind of evolved. So as I was just kind of alluding to, Dan North initiated the behaviour-driven development really about 10 years ago. He started looking at this. And he was trying to bring together test-driven development with domain-driven design in that in this kind of test-first, test-driven development method, what he wanted to do was get rid of the word test, because he thought really actually what we were specifying there was expected behaviours, and that was actually going to put some rigour and value in the code that was being delivered. And he wanted to be able to collaborate more effectively with other members of the team in a language that everybody understood. So he wanted to bring in a kind of ubiquitous language, a common vocabulary to help collaborate around those tests in a way that made more sense to everybody. So Daniel kind of came up with that in an article. Well, he's been working on it since about 2003, but wrote about that in an article in Better Software magazine back in 2006. And then he was collaborating with a number of different people who were still very active in the BDD community, so some of them are here. He came up with this given, when, then syntax. So Chris Matz, you can see there, he's a business analyst, and essentially in terms of trying to come up with this common language, they realised that actually if instead of arrange, act, assert, you use some language like, given some initial context, when an event occurs, then ensure some outcomes, that's actually kind of like analysis. It's like specifying a requirement. So this syntax became very central to BDT in terms of trying to achieve that shared understanding as in terms of the expected behaviours of the underlying system. And there's various tools being developed. So Dan was working on JBehave as a replacement for JUnit, and essentially trying to use this framework to help drive automated tests, but be more visible and accessible to other team members. There's also RBehave for Ruby, there's a book called RSpec, and there's also an aspiration that business analysts and testers would be able to write this kind of syntax in a free text editor, or maybe even on a wiki, in order to help make the understanding of that business rule more accessible, and that that free text could actually drive underlying automated tests. And tools like Cucumber and Fitness, amongst others, help with that. So this is all happening in the BDD space. And then it started to kind of move beyond the three amigos in terms of the business analyst, developer, and tester, where we started talking about this as helping with acceptance testing as well, not just sort of unit testing. And so now we're thinking about involving the business a bit more, write a failing acceptance test first, and then that drives the underlying unit testing, and that gets refactored. People like Liz Chio were suggesting and blogging about actually the important thing is the conversation rather than the automated test. So actually the value that we're getting is in the collaboration around that business rule rather than any kind of necessary speeding up that's happening with the automation process. So then we move to specification by example, and this is alongside Agile acceptance testing, acceptance test-driven development. There's kind of a number of different techniques in this space. This is Goiko Adzik, who wrote this book, Specification by Example, a few years ago. And now we're losing the word test altogether, and we're talking about defining requirements and essentially getting some synergy between requirements and tests, and actually your requirements and tests become the same thing. And there's this focus on examples instead of tests, so using examples to collaborate on. And this is where I got really interested. I could really see that there was a synergy in terms of specifying a test and a requirement in one document. Having been a tester and seeing that handover between business analysis and testing, where somebody new picks up a use case and then writes tests from it, every time there's a handover like that, it's a bit like Chinese whispers. There's an opportunity for misunderstandings to creep in, and for somebody else to have a kind of take on what the underlying requirement is. And also, the test analysts, when they're dealing with real data and real conditions, there's often a whole new round of understanding and digging and trying to find out what's actually supposed to happen. So this use of examples in terms of explicitly defining exactly what we expect to happen as a technique, even with nothing to do with automation, really appealed to me. That's specification by example. And then over the last couple of years, there's really been a move towards more lean techniques. There's been lots of publications in the lean world, like Lean Startup, where they're introducing us to ways of achieving business value earlier. So Lean Startup book came up as a result of lots of startup companies been spending a lot of time building something that nobody wants. And so there's lots of this material talking about building better software, building the right software that matters, business outcomes, capabilities, and making impact. So these kind of lean principles are really joining up with the BDD principles. So saying, okay, we're collaborating well on examples, but how do we know which examples are the best ones, and how do we ensure that that our software development actually makes impact? So that people like Goico and other members of the development community, now this is becoming appealing and interesting to project managers and to business stakeholders in terms of what BDD can deliver. So that's the evolution of BDD. So what does business-driven development mean to me then? Well, for me it's fundamentally about communication. I really like this quote from down north: most problems that teams face are about communication, and all the others are too. It's about more effective collaboration. So what I think is lacking in Scrum and other Agile methodologies is help in terms of how do we actually effectively collaborate. So, we'll do our Scrum training or whatever, and we know that, okay, I'm a tester, I'm supposed to go and talk to the developer and the business analyst about this, but how do you do that? What we often see is this water, scrum, ball type scenario where businesses move towards something iterative, but actually everyone falls into their old roles, and you have developers doing some development, business analysts doing some analysis, and the testers sitting around waiting for something to be developed, which is really expensive and not going to actually get some of those gains that Agile is seeking out to do. And fundamentally, the exploration of examples is really key. So what I started to notice is those people we really value in our teams, those technical people who can also express things in a business-friendly way, naturally use examples and will clarify something back to a business user or stakeholder using a very specific example of an interaction or something. So this makes lots of sense. And a laser focus in terms of achieving benefits in the shortest possible time frame. So incrementing, moving from waterfall delivery to something incremental is hard for lots of businesses. And surely we should be focusing on helping ourselves identify valuable increments of work and horizons that allow us to get something out there quicker, rather than just moving rapidly into something that's iterative without having that capability. So you can't do one without the other. So how do we chunk down our business problems and visions into something that allows us to do that? Well, at Sparkle, we came up with this model, which helps put some of this stuff into context. So we need a process, really, that's going to help us go from our business ideas through to delivering some business capability. We also need a framework to collaborate around, and we need some tools to do that. Okay, so here's the feedback onion. The feedback onion, the layers of it are really representing the different levels of collaboration within our organisations. We recognise that different audiences have different levels of detail that they need to collaborate. They have different useful tools for collaboration. So here are the layers. We have business at the widest level. We've got projects going on within our businesses. Within our projects, we have various business value increments, and what I mean by that is some kind of milestone or horizon or chunk of value sitting within a project which we can group together and try and either deliver as a phase or measure feedback against. We then have our iterations, so maybe a sprint, and within that iteration we're trying to deliver a showcase maybe once in that iteration, and there'll be collaboration there. And then in the centre, very deliberately called this capability rather than feature, because the important thing about what we're delivering, our user stories, if you like, is that there's some value associated with them. So these are our layers of the onion, and the interactions and the opportunities for feedback at those different layers have a different kind of heartbeat. So obviously right in the middle of the onion, when we're collaborating around user stories and examples, that heartbeat is very fast. As we go out through the outsides of the onion, we have much fewer opportunities to really leverage the feedback that we get. So what sorts of questions, in fact I'll just go back, what we recognise is that in order to keep on track as businesses, we really need to try and answer questions at each layer of collaboration. So questions that we might have at the business level layer might be like, should we build this? Can we build a viable business around this? This is what Lean Startup talks about. Shall we pivot or persevere? So, should we continue in this direction or should we change direction? Really important questions. At the project layer, we're asking why are we doing this? What's our vision? What options do we have? At the business value increment layer, we want to know, how do we demonstrate value associated with this chunk of delivery? What are the risks, the dependencies? Which approach should we take? At the iteration layer, we're asking, okay, which are the best, which business capabilities or stories are the best ones to take us towards delivering that value? What order should we do that in? And at the capability layer, we're asking, does this feature, this user story deliver value? What are the tasks that make up that user story? Does it work? Those kinds of questions. So in order to keep on track, really, we're trying to get answers to the business questions as fast as we can, so that we stay heading in the right direction. And we're also trying to get answers to the questions that we've got within all the other layers of collaboration. So we have a collaboration framework to help us actually collaborate effectively at those different layers. What's important is that we're maximising opportunities for feedback. So we're not only trying to maximise, but to speed up that feedback loop going out to the outer layer, we're also trying to maximise all of the feedback happening at on our journey through a project. So we're trying to maximise opportunities in terms of making them more regular. We're trying to maximise the value of those opportunities in that we want to be focusing on real high-value examples. We want the quality of interactions to be good, so we want everyone to know what they're doing and to understand what the outputs are. Lean talks about minimum viable product. That's sometimes which is central to some of the Lean startup stuff. But actually, what's most important is that we're trying to think about what's the leanest thing that we can do to get feedback on, as opposed to something that represents a baseline for our product version 1. So at Sparkle, we use these different collaboration tools at each layer. Not to say that they're kind of exclusive to these layers of the onion, but this is what we do, and this is, there's a process moving between these collaboration tools, as well as you know, the definition of what each of those are. So starting with the Lean Canvas. Lean Canvas is based on something called a business model canvas, which was talked about in a book called Business Model Generation. Lean Canvas places a bit more focus on early feedback to address uncertainty and risk. And this is put together by a guy called Ash Moria. And on it, it's a one-pager. It talks about 3 problems and 3 solutions, the 3 main problems and 3 main solutions that your business might have, what your unique value proposition is, and really importantly, what the key metrics are for your business to measure success, and what the key impacts are that you're trying to make as a business. So this is a really useful tool to get everybody in your organisation, in your IT delivery team, really to have a shared understanding of what you're trying to do, because clearly you're trying to influence those metrics that drive your business. Impact mapping is a tool for high-level project visualization and planning. It's extremely useful. So I've been using this technique now for about 4 years. And what it helps you do is not only sort of visualize your project scope, but it helps you really clarify assumptions between business and technical teams. It helps you explore options, do some divergent and convergent thinking around how you might actually go about delivering certain business impacts. And what you do is you move through these different stages of essentially a mind mapping technique. You spend a lot of time considering why you're doing this particular initiative, exactly what you're trying to achieve and how you might measure it. You then brainstorm who the various stakeholders may be, and essentially what or how we can meet their needs, or how we'd like to change their behaviour in line with that goal. And then you think about, well, what features, what epics, what user stories could help us achieve those goals. So it gives you a really clear line of sight between the features that you're building and the underlying business objective, which has some measurable metric associated with it. It really helps get the whole team on the same page, and it's a very, very good way of actually engaging the stakeholders. So what I've talked about before is that lots of companies are struggling with this. What I've found is that this technique actually really is very engaging to bring stakeholders in. Once they've been in one of these sessions once, they're actually actively asking IT to come and run more of these sessions. So that's impact mapping. Also, Goyko Addict wrote a book about this a few years ago. You can find more about it there on that URL. So another important part of that impact mapping is that it helps you identify an increment for delivery. So once you've visualised that scope, I'll just go back. Once you've visualised that scope, you're able to identify your horizons of delivery, your milestones. You can do some prioritization and take a chunk of this as your first business value increment. And this is a step really that we use at Sparkle that we found enormously valuable. It's quite hard at this point once you've identified some scope to avoid falling into sort of analysis paralysis, generating hundreds and hundreds of stories based on a set of scope. And what the dream demo is for us is an articulation of how would we best demonstrate that value associated with that business value increment in maybe a 45-minute demo in 3 months' time. Exactly what would we include in that? And what examples would we use to help show the breadth of our solution and its capability? What examples would we include that show that we're making progress through the project and gives everybody confidence? What examples would we use to help us show that we're attacking risk and we're removing technical questions and other concerns that people might have? So we start with this dream demo like a set of steps that we want to execute, where we start early on focusing on the types of customer, the type of example that we're going to use to make this work. And it's something to collaborate on. We can take that back to the customer or involve them in that very, very actively in order to get a very clear expression of what we're all heading towards. So that's sitting at the business value increment layer. Then at the iteration layer, demo steps and stories, so user stories. So at this layer, what we found helpful is to then take a few steps from that dream demo using kind of familiar agile techniques and practices to chunk those down then into user stories. And again, we're trying to use examples even at this level to really clarify exactly what's happening and elaborate those demo steps. So story mapping does this as well. It takes a kind of scenario and it looks for the leanest path through that scenario, and it helps you build your stories around a scenario, which is really the same thing that I'm talking about. And then in the capability layer, we are collaborating around examples all the time. So on a daily basis, we're using examples to help clarify the implementation of a particular story. We're using maybe it's drawings on magic whiteboard paper, it could be mock-ups, it could be use cases, it could be sequence diagrams, or it could be these type of examples, which is very much the specification by example technique. Now that there's a lot to this, so it's very difficult to kind of get this all across in a couple of minutes. But essentially what you'll see here is we've got some definition of a high-level user story. As a campaign manager, in order to target campaigns, I want to be able to issue coupons for a selected list of customers. Then we've got this given, when, then syntax that's helping us express the business rules. So we're saying, given somebody turns up with a loyalty card, maybe a Next card or a Boots card or something like that, when the transaction is completed, then a certain coupon will be issued at the till. But we're explicitly stating what we expect to happen there through the use of these examples. And it's the process associated with coming up with these examples that's the really valuable bit. Now it just so happens that this is also automatable and can run a regression test in the background, which is massively valuable. But the process of coming up with this in itself serves to really eliminate those defects, those requirements type defects, very early on in the process. That's specification by example. So we are collaborating all the time, fast heartbeats in the middle of our kind of capability parts of the onion, and we're valuing continuous acceptance. Continuous delivery into a production environment is really hard. Continuous acceptance into a test environment with these processes in place is much easier. And what we're doing here is trying to maximize that feedback associated with each delivery maybe 7 or 8 times a day to have this continuous process which gives us confidence. So that's our kind of collaboration framework. Now another important part of behaviour-driven development is about living documentation. So we've done all this work on the way into the Onion, building out from our business ideas through to something that's valuable to go into production in the shortest possible time frame. How do we maximise the usefulness of all of that stuff? So what we want to do is make sure that all of the outputs from that process have high levels of reuse and longevity, that they don't get shelved, that they actually facilitate shared understanding and serve as a single version of the truth. So how do we do that? Well, the foundation of our living documentation systems really are examples. If we're able to rationalise them and turn them into executable specifications, which is what I showed you just then, we're essentially getting a great deal of confidence that our system is working. And when I say executable specifications, it doesn't have to be automated. Something that can be followed by a tester or a business person that serves to share that understanding. It's the same document whether you're a tester or an analyst or a business user. If we're able to componentize our examples cleverly, then we can really leverage them to great effect within a living documentation system. Then at the iteration layer, we've got our user stories and our business rules and processes. Well, actually, it's within a wiki in a living documentation system. If we group together our examples into a useful set that represents a structure that's useful to the business and meaningful, then a user can drill down into the living documentation system and find more details all the way down to the examples. And that can also serve to meet the needs of the development team in terms of living specifications as well as business users. Then at the business value increment layer, we spent this time articulating the stream demo, which is, again, a higher grouping of user stories and examples. We thought that those steps and the stories and examples contained within them were highly valuable to the business in terms of demonstrating capability, so they probably make sense as a good target for regression testing. And that allows us to achieve that maintainability. At the project layer, our impact map can also be a product roadmap. And back to the DDD principles, domain-driven design, if we're able to organise and structure our living documentation in a way that represents the underlying design, then we can componentize our examples to great effect. And we can also have places on our living documentation system to collaborate about things that we might be doing in the future as well as things that we've already delivered. And then at the business layer, this is slightly aspirational, but our vision as a business, wouldn't it be great if we could actually have some measurement of the impact that we're making with the delivery of our software. So that was a very, very fast run through in 40 minutes, but essentially what we're trying to do with BDD and this framework in particular is maximise the opportunities for feedback by using a collaboration framework that's going to help us move through the stages of our process with highly valuable things. We're also then trying to maximise the usefulness of that into something enduring and create an efficient process that we can all work to. And what I think is interesting here is that none of this is exclusive to the Agile community. If we focus on leveraging our collaboration and communication, it's actually a good way of implementing Agile. If we can get those things working, then everything else should fit into place. So if you're trying to implement Agile in an organisation, that would be really useful. If you're trying to fix an Agile process which is failing, I expect some of those problems are down to communication or collaboration, so that would be useful. If you're already doing Agile well and want to accelerate that, then also these techniques are useful. And even if your company is running waterfall, some of these techniques can be really, really useful. Also, in helping businesses chunk down their problems and deliver the value associated with time to market and agility. So very quick run through, but that was me. If you'd like to continue if you have any questions, or want to continue any of this discussion, hashtag Feedback Onion. This is me, Jenny Damar, co-made of a company that we partner with, and Spartan is the company that I work for. So happy to take any questions. Right. I'm just reading this one out. Do you have any suggestions for how to move a team, the individuals in a team, used to old world roles, seven testers, and old world processes across the BDD process? Yes, definitely. So the specification by example technique in particular is talked a lot about being an agile technique, but I've implemented those techniques in a context where the company actually wasn't particularly agile. So it doesn't have to be part of an agile technique. So it's a learned thing where you actually get good at drawing your test conditions out earlier. And testers, once they're, I'm a tester at heart, learn that technique and get comfortable with it by using examples to help specify in advance. And once that collaboration gets working, then the actual other transitions towards Agile becomes much easier. So specification by example is something that you can do it kind of piecemeal. You can start by enhancing your existing use cases with examples to clarify what's meant by them. You don't really need to change a process or change anybody's roles or anything, but you can start by kind of making the BA and the tester work more closely together, and that eliminates lots of problems right off the bat. I don't think I've got any more questions, so I might hand back over to Alex. Oh, I've got another one. Okay, so from Vernon Richards, I often see teams focused on the automated regression aspect of BDD rather than the communication aspect, which usually means you end up with a lot of feature files around a lot of edge cases. Any ideas how to prevent getting into a situation where you have bloated living documentation? Yes, I totally agree, and I think that that's a symptom of a lot of this has come from the development community, and because its foundations are in test-driven development, a lot of it has mostly come from people who have got a lot of understanding and technical breadth of understanding around tools and automation. So naturally that's what's happened. I think that there's a real opportunity for more business-facing people to embrace these techniques, which can make a massive difference to how things are working. So as I was sort of talking as you go through that process, if you're able to really limit the examples that you're using, particularly in line with that dream demo perhaps that I talked about, and think about what the target for automation is, and really start with high-value things, then that's useful. I think what can also happen as well is you having a lot of feature files and a lot of automated tests that are hard to maintain is if they start failing and they're hard to maintain and you start doing lots of red tests, then everybody just starts to ignore them. So it's much better to have a smaller number of high-value tests that everybody believes than a lot of tests that essentially not providing the value. So in order to do that, you really need to get this everybody focused on the high-value stuff, which is why you need a process moving from your business ideas all the way through into your development iterations. And that needs a certain level of collaboration and buy-in. Have I got any more questions? I don't think so.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. Alec, again, thank you for a very informative webinar. Thanks everybody who joined. Just a reminder, we will be making the recording available afterwards if you'd like to share it with your colleagues, and we'll be sending a link out shortly for that. And also, just to let you know that the hashtag we're using, if you'd like to have any further discussion following on from the webinar, is hashtag Feedback Onion. That's on Twitter. So once again, thank you, Jenny, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.